for most people, but some people it's a little bit more, and he overcame those struggles. And through that, I think has a really deep sense of empathy, of what it's like to go through challenges, and to reflect on what that looks like at MBA. I'll show you this picture. You can get a sense of what Mr. Norton looked like back in high school. This was the front of the sports section when he was in high school, because he joined the football team his junior year. Pretty tremendous feat. Ended up becoming a part of a state championship team in '98, and still to this day I was reflecting with Mr. Klausner how much we remember when he got in the game during that year, and how excited everybody was, because everybody had a great sense of what he had overcome. And so they captured this with this blessing in disguise of ways that he saw his cerebral palsy as a real blessing in a lot of ways. So you are fortunate to be able to hear from Mr. Milam. Please welcome Mr. Erik Milam.
Hey guys, well thanks for having me here today. Somebody get my cell phone or email from Mr. Norton, and I'll buy a poinsettia from you guys and help out your prom. That'll be fun. I really appreciate you having me here today. I'm going to read my presentation. As Mr. Norton said, I have had a speech impediment my whole life. It's still here. So is my cerebral palsy. It doesn't go away. So it'll help me stay on track if I read it. So sorry to be behind the podium. I really appreciate this opportunity, 150 years of the school. I wore my MBA tie today. This place is so special to me and my heart. You are special because, I know it's been said earlier, MBA is a brotherhood, and I can tell you it gets better as you get older. And I think about the kind of legacy I'd like to leave. I didn't want that to end when I graduated, so I do these speeches because, I hope you hear something from me today that touches your heart, that makes your life better. And if I do that, it's worth it. So I know what it's like to feel different and feel like I don't belong, because of the issues that Mr. Norton highlighted. I'm here today because I know all of you will face the fear of not belonging at some point in your lives if you haven't already. I know this because it's part of being human. I found that out at an early age. And this fear is especially heightened, I think, for all of us in high school. Maslow references the need to belong and feel loved as the third factor in his hierarchy of needs, after only our physiological needs and needs for shelter, and before self-achievement and self-actualization. So feeling like you belong and feeling loved and accepted is very important. A problem I had in high school and college is thinking I could achieve enough to feel like I belonged. And no matter how much I achieved in life, the fear of not belonging remained. I can speak from experience that eventually we must address our own needs for belonging, empathy, and love. Empathy is the path to feeling connected and belonging, to feeling love for others and loving ourselves for who we are, which, if I'm being honest, at times was hard for me in my life. Empathy is a deep sense of felt connection between two people. It goes deeper than cognitive understanding and requires experiencing feelings. Empathy establishes a connection between your head and your heart, which is a necessary skill for life and relationships. And what I find most interesting about empathy is that it's mutually beneficial. In fact, I think when I'm empathetic towards another person, it benefits me probably more than them. If I'm able to empathize with another person, my heart grows and I feel more connected. My life is richer the more empathy I can feel for others. Empathy is part of learning, changing, and growing, and that is why it's a key component of your education here at MBA. I wrote a paper on James Baldwin in the 9th grade. He was an African American who was born in 1924, raised in Harlem by an abusive stepfather, was very poor, endured racism, and was gay. He was an author, and he writes, "You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. It was books that taught me the things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all people who were alive or who had ever been alive." When I was in school here, there was no documentary called The Mask You Live In. As Mr. Joya said, the emphasis on character and, talking about these things has really, started in the last, 5 or 10 years. I wish there had been a documentary like The Mask You Live In because it would have resonated with me and given me language to express my feelings at the time. In reading about empathy, I found that many psychologists say we have an innate ability, all of us, to be empathetic because when we hear a baby cry, most of us will tend to its needs. I have a baby at home. I know what that feels like. My problem with that logic, and this was kind of discussed in The Mask You Live In, is that as children and adolescents, especially adults, most of us are taught not to cry like babies when we have needs. So oftentimes we don't really share them much at all. And so how do we know, as friends, family members, classmates, teammates, when to give our empathy and understanding to someone else? Looking back, I did not know how to tell someone I was hurting. All I knew how to do was achieve as a way to address my completely natural feelings of fear, sadness, and loneliness. I didn't share them with my classmates or other people. In fact, the first time I ever said the words, "I have cerebral palsy," was this article right before my senior year. And in doing that, I was able to actually receive more empathy from my classmates because I opened up. I was vulnerable. They started to understand me a little bit more because I was able to talk about it. It was very freeing. It took a lot of the pressure off of me. And I was able to actually receive more understanding from my classmates because I finally let them in. I think I would have achieved greater success at MBA and in college if I'd been taught the skills that you're learning now about things like empathy, etc. In my experience, there are 4 sequential layers to empathy. And the first is simple. It's noticing another person exists. It's respecting someone. It's seeing them. And the second is thinking and listening to a person and knowing them more deeply. And the third layer of empathy, which I think is the key, is truly feeling the feelings of another person. And the fourth layer of empathy is expressing in words or actions that we understand and have compassion for them. I'm going to try to illustrate this by sharing a recent experience. In July, I got pulled over and received my first speeding ticket in the state of Tennessee. As someone who never got a demerit here at MBA, I'm a rule follower. And at first I was mortified that I got a speeding ticket. I was defensive. I felt disappointed, embarrassed, and it was, it kind of ruined my day for a minute. And as the officer approached my car, it was only a few days after the tragedies in Baton Rouge, Minneapolis, and Dallas, which had been all over the news and on the forefront of my mind. And when the policeman approached my car, all I could think about was that his day is probably more stressful than mine. And it took my disappointment and feeling embarrassed and I just put that aside. I realized that he's risking his life every day on his job for my safety. And then in that moment, I was able to value his experience as much as my own. And when he asked for my license and registration, I felt comfortable and I felt safe with him. And as he returned to his car to process my information, in the quiet of that moment, I realized that there are people that don't feel safe and comfortable in that moment. And I hurt deeply for many other people who feel terrified for their lives when they get pulled over. In that moment, I felt pain and hurt for the African American community like I never felt before. I don't think words can do it justice, but I can try to describe it by saying in that moment, my heart broke and grew larger all at the same time. And I think that's empathy. And as the officer returned to my car and gave me the ticket, before he walked away, I said, "Excuse me, sir, I need to tell you my heart breaks for what's going on right now, and thank you for your service." After giving me this ticket, he stared at me kind of like I was crazy, like, who is this guy? But I think he felt that I was genuine, and he said, "Thank you." And I think in that moment, we both connected and felt a little less alone in the world. As I look back on that, I'm amazed that in one experience, I was able to have a deep and profound empathy for both sides of a very complex and challenging situation in our society. And I think the 4 levels of empathy that I highlighted earlier made that possible. In addition to the news coverage, I'd already spent a lot of time noticing, thinking, and listening to people about these issues. I'd happened to have about a half dozen conversations over the last 18 months with some of my African American friends about the pain and fear they have of racial profiling, and especially when their sons are behind the wheel of a car and get pulled over. I've also talked with families of police officers to understand how much anxiety and pain they feel about the situation. But it was the feelings I was able to experience that took me from just simply a cognitive awareness of an issue, from awareness to feeling a deep sense of empathy. From there, I was able to express that empathy to another person with heartfelt words. I think there are 4 challenges that can hinder our ability to have empathy. First, we are self-absorbed. A second challenge is limited life experience. Third is time pressure. And fourth is discomfort with feelings and vulnerability, which I've already touched on some of that. Empathy is not an easy skill to learn at your age or any age for that matter. Your brains are still developing. Your brains will continue until you're in your 20s. Growing, and so you're naturally in a very self-absorbed time in your lives. I define being self-absorbed as motivated primarily by our own needs and desires. Often the underlying cause of self-absorption is fear, like the fear of not belonging. Author Daniel Goleman says, "Self-absorption in all its forms kills empathy, let alone compassion. When we focus on ourselves, our world contracts as our problems and preoccupations loom large. But when we focus on others, our world expands. Our own problems drift to the periphery of the mind and so seem smaller. And we increase our capacity for connection or compassionate action." Second challenge to empathy in high school is your life experiences may be limited. Many of you have not had to deal with adversity, and so your ability to relate to others' pain may be limited, and that's okay. Or if you've experienced adversity, you feel lonely because you've had a different life experience than most of your peers, which was very true for me when I was here. As we have shared experiences, the ability to empathize grows. The third challenge to empathy that I see is time pressure. Studies show the more time pressure you feel, the less likely you will be empathetic. When we have to make a quick decision or in a time crunch, we do not notice the needs of others. And while social media and texting and technology have made us faster and more productive, it has distanced us from the emotional connections required for empathy in social interactions. Something else that I've thought of with social media is that most of us are friends or follow people that are like us and that think like us and say the same things and have the same worldview. So from my standpoint, one issue with social media is it's actually somewhat isolating, I guess, what we're exposed to. And the fourth challenge is empathy requires vulnerability and being comfortable with our feelings and the feelings of others. Keep in mind that empathy does not mean having to change our own experience, feelings, or viewpoint. However, it does require us to have both our personal understanding and feel the experience as true for them. I've been thinking that if I went back to high school and was sitting in your seat, what are the things that I could do to become more empathetic? And so let's revisit the 4 layers of empathy and come up with some ideas. Remember, the first layer of empathy is to notice another person. A part of noticing is not being self-absorbed and getting out of our comfort zones. So, volunteer or do a service project. Sit with a different group of people at lunch. Make a goal to befriend someone different than you. Someone with different abilities, interests, of a different race, etc. I can think back to high school. I think some of the most impactful experience that I've had was when I went on a mission trip, where I just got outside of this bubble and I saw, people in poverty, people that had, greater needs than I did. It made me more empathetic. The second layer of empathy is thinking and listening. Spend time in your thoughts and put yourself in another person's shoes. This could be a classmate you don't particularly get along with or understand, or someone in another grade here. Think about your experiences you've had that can help you relate to that person better. Think about the questions you want to ask so you can learn more about them. And the third layer is being able to feel the emotions of another person. This requires an openness to an experience different than your own, not only their words, but also their feelings. Here's a quote from Dr. Thomas Gordon: "Everyone wants others to understand how he feels when he talks, not just what he's saying." I find that when I take care of myself, I'm much more likely to be empathetic towards another person because I'm able to be present with them. Things that help me stay present are getting enough sleep, eating right, journaling, or simply taking a few deep breaths when I'm feeling anxiety, self-absorbed, and not in the moment. And a final layer is expressing our empathy in words or actions. It can be as simple as reaching out with kindness just to let someone know you're thinking about them. Yet sometimes the best kind of empathy is just being there with someone and listening. Henry Nouwen writes, "When we honestly ask ourselves which person in our lives means the most to us, we often find that it is those who, instead of giving advice, solutions, or cures, have chosen rather to share our pain and touch our wounds with a warm and tender hand. The friend who can be silent with us in a moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in an hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not curing, not healing, and face with us the reality of our powerlessness. That is a friend who cares." So as you go through high school, I hope you feel connected to those around you, your family, friends, classmates, and community. And whatever adversity comes your way, I hope that you allow it to soften your heart, not only for yourself, but also for others. Your source of empathy is rooted in your own feelings and pain. It is our imperfections that make us human and connect us. I hope you will see your trials in life, self-doubt, and tough feelings as opportunities to build your empathy, because doing so will change your life and the lives of those around you. And I think this quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says it best as I close: "Is the most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, an understanding of life, and fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep loving concern. Beautiful people do not just happen. Thank you for your time today.